Hi, this is Paula Gloria, and this show is called Farther Down the Rabbit Hole because we like to go into topics more deeply. Today we're going to go into topics more deeply with two other very deep public access producers. One is my husband, Joe Barton, to my extreme right. Thank you, Joe Barton, for joining me on the show. And here we have Joe Friendly, who's... how many years have you been a public access producer?
Since 74.
1974. And today we're going to be talking about the topic of Lynne Stewart.
Great.
So when did you first, since 74 you've been a public access producer, when did Lynne Stewart first come on your...
The main point is that it was before she had trouble with the law. She was a outspoken activist that I enjoyed scheduling, you know, like Who Should I Shoot Tonight? She'd be speaking somewhere. And I enjoyed putting up her talks on my program. So there...
Do you know when that started?
No.
74, 84, 94,
I would say it was, I think, in the 90s.
In the 90s.
Yeah. And there was... since the 93 bombing, that might have been around the time I tuned in on her. But
the 93 bombing was supposed to have been a landmarks decimation, or there was something I always hear the word
well, the main thing is it
landmarks.
was a U.S. government plot against Islam. That the whole stunt was arranged by the FBI. They had the choice of whether to use real dynamite or false dynamite. The group had been totally infiltrated by the FBI. There was a guy who recorded all the conversations and brought them to the FBI regularly. And he said, ultimately after the event, but the FBI told me we wouldn't be using real explosives. So they wanted a terrorist incident for political reasons of our government, that they wanted to promote rule by fear, a police state, and that's what I hope we can talk about today. I think our courts have to be pointed to for the corruption they are, that they are one of the three branches, theoretically, or the four branches if you count the media, but in particular the courts that Lynne Stewart had to deal with. We're talking the federal trial courts in New York, otherwise known as district courts. And in particular, I wanted to pick on extra, not the judge who did Lynne Stewart wrong, but Loretta Preska. Have you checked out her?
No, but before we go into too great details, I just want to make sure Joe Barton's on the same page.
Oh yeah, Loretta Preska, buddy.
No, before we go into Loretta Preska, what did you think of what Ralph Pointer said about the 93 bombing? Remember when he was talking to us with Betty Davis? He was saying that there was...
It was like a political stunt, but...
Did you hear that show that Joe and I did with Betty Davis? And he was going into great detail about how this guy was... He even fooled the FBI because he kept records of the FBI. He would record the FBI telling him to do things that were dangerous. And Ralph Pointer said because he recorded the FBI telling him to do these things, he was probably ensuring his safety. Do you remember that, Joe?
Yeah, I remember that.
I remember that story from Ralph Schoenman told that story originally, but that is indeed the case, and he could prove what we're saying, that it was a government project, a U.S. government project.
Right, so maybe some comments from Joe on that.
Were you surprised, or
yeah, were you
had that sense?
surprised?
No, I wasn't surprised because they've been doing our government's been doing it going back into the 60s.
False flag stuff.
Yeah, and setting up all through the 60s the radicals like the Weathermen, the Black Panthers, Students for a Democratic Society. You know, they infiltrated them and set them up with different projects to do, and then when they did the projects, they busted them, you know.
Yeah.
So it's, this is a long history of our government setting up the so-called radicals. First, they helped to build the radicals up, and then they set them up, like I said in one of our other interviews, where Angela Davis said that they helped the Panthers gain access to the airport so that they could blow up the cockpit of an airplane, and then they busted them. But the reason they did it was because every time we have a terrorist, so-called terrorist attack, they get more funding. So anytime they want funding, they set up this...
But how did the Black Panthers go along with that? It seems such an obvious setup.
Well, I wasn't really in with the Black Panthers. I don't really know, but from what I read, this was a long time ago. I read Angela Davis's book. She said that the FBI, the Panthers, thought that it would bring a lot of people to their movement. If they took credit for blowing it up. That at that time, and you got to go back to when it was happening in the late '60s, early '70s. A lot of people were looking for a revolution. We knew that even the hippies wanted to see a revolution. They wanted to see a peaceful revolution, but the radicals wanted to see a violent revolution.
Is that when the yippies came along?
To
try to radicalize or try to make the hippies' desire for a peaceful revolution more violent? So they could get more funding?
The yippies weren't so much into violence. They were more into media.
That can be pretty violent.
Like theater. The yippies were more into, media theater.
I do want to make one point while we're on the subject of the 60s. On public access, that the 60s were basically a complaint that our whole society was on the wrong track.
Yeah.
And they didn't basically respond to us positively, and therefore we continued on the wrong track, and now we see what happened. That we have the total corruption of our, we were picking on the courts, or I was trying to, but all three governments, all three branches are corrupt.
Yeah.
And it was just pointed out on a program I was watching yesterday that since Eisenhower, all the presidents have been members of the CIA. Every single one. Or since Carter, I think it was.
But Joe's always been pretty specific and clear that there's good and bad people in all the agencies. And now's the time to call on the goodness of people.
Yeah.
You're saying that?
Yeah,
all right. Well, we want as many insiders to cooperate with the big change, but we do. Let me go back to picking on the federal court, though. I have on YouTube this meeting of, I think, 4 different old-timers talking about things, and the one that I've made separate was Ralph Pointer criticizing the district court. And it is a problem. The judges are politically appointed. They have political games going on. And the latest intrigue that you were alluding to is to turn the prison system into the market and privatize the prison system. Then you have a money dynamic where they're bribing politicians for longer sentences, they're bribing judges for longer sentences, and it's all a money thing, which is like carrying corruption to a new level of tragedy. So this all is like basically wrong, and it does call for changing to a different trip. The whole prison thing we were saying off camera is just the whole idea of prisons has to be reconsidered as a people. It's just needless cruelty, barbaric cruelty.
And when the founding fathers set up this country, they set it up, and when they set up, they said that felonies were heinous crimes, where it was murder or rape, really bad stuff. Now our system is degraded so much that possession of marijuana is a felony.
Or in Lynne Stewart's case,
or tape recording somebody.
Just to jump. I'm a jumper, I guess. To me, the heart, or one of the punchers of the Lynne Stewart thing, is the crime she was sentenced to 28 months, changed to 10 years, was material support for terrorism.
Yeah.
And all that material support was carrying words. Now that is a perversion of language to say the carrying of words, ideas, is
Right.
material support. Material means something tangible. It means
Right.
so to
Well, yeah, but
for our courts to resort to that, that's just playing games. But I wanted to say
Well,
one thing.
our whole court system is about playing games.
All right, okay.
It's all so corrupt. When you go into court, I've been there many times in front of judges, and when you go in, if you cite a law, and you can be citing the Constitution, you can be citing Supreme Court rulings, they just ignore them, and then they'll throw some silly statute at you like, well, but we know what the Supreme Court says, and we know what the Constitution says, but we have this statute, and this statute, and the lower courts, they overrule Supreme Court rulings, they overrule the Constitution, they do what they want, There's no chance in this country for a fair trial in any of these courts.
Now, to continue with Loretta Prescott, she is the chief judge of what we're talking about. She presides over the trial judges in the federal court. She was appointed by Bush Sr., and the one thing I'm going to be covering in a couple of days at Judson Church is this kid pleaded guilty to supporting terrorism to the extent of allowing in his London apartment somebody to stay over there for a couple of days on his couch who had a sack of parkas and what was the other thing he had? I think caps for your head. And he pleaded guilty like as a settlement, and she sentenced him to 15 years in the federal prison. Again, a material support for terrorism kind of thing. That's the police state mentality, that they're using these false flags to play games like that.
But do you see why not to consent, if you possibly can, to that jurisdiction? A district court means they're foreign to us. It's a district out of the District of Columbia. That's why once you say you stand under the charges, they can go merrily along with their administrative procedures. Those statutes are administrative procedures for their particular corporation. And those corporations are registered with Dun and Bradstreet numbers. We're not just making a dramatic statement when we say they're cash register courts. They really are registered as money-making operations.
Well, when you
But then
resort to that...
I don't know what Lynne would have done to get out of it, because it seems as though Lynne chose the path to go with the bar, the American bar, is her kind of cult of choice, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
How could you say it, Joe? You get
she
privilege.
surrendered to the jurisdiction of the system, and you're challenging the system itself as based on false premises.
Well, but it does seem as though when we talk to Ralph and with Betty, and because I've never really met Lynne in person, and I never kept much track because I was such a 9/11 person, and I was only focused on the research. And even you and I were differing on the research. So when it came up that the landmark bombing of 1993 was important, this wasn't the one where the building went dramatically down in 11 seconds and turned to dust. This was 1993, where they got him on destroying landmarks. And I think that's so interesting, because right now it looks, for the sake of helping handicapped people, which seems to be a good thing, St. Mark's Church is going to destroy a landmark building there.
Well, to pick up on your point, the 93 bombing was government orchestrated to this extent that Bill Clinton had already cooked up anti-terror legislation, and they needed an event to create some politics for the legislation. So they had already planned to erode our civil liberties and turn us into a police state and make a deal with the federal government and the local police to
bring
perfect their power, so that they would have a, whatever they call it, a fusion police state. So
what was
on
the
the
plan called? This was in '93 or '92.
I just know the legislation had been worked on with the Clinton team.
It's interesting because by '96, the worst thing Clinton did was the Telecommunications Act of '96. But anyway, I don't want to interrupt you.
Well, that was the point.
So '93 came along to kind of put in solidifying the police state.
And let's talk, what is a police state? You know, it's like freedom, liberty that we sing about and all that. It's a feeling. It's like you're not worried. You have the benefit of doubt, and the next guy has the benefit of doubt, and everything's... But once fear gets into the thing, then you're like, uh-oh. And
police does that.
And then we fight these wrong wars, and then we bring the veterans in to be the police. That's a real tragedy. Once we've broken down their consciences by fighting wars that shouldn't be fought, they're not good policemen in the sense of living up to that respect the citizen idea. They're
well,
pissed
I
off.
heard the veterans are coming back, and they're top on the terrorist list, are returning veterans. Did you hear that? You're implying they're coming back and entering the police force.
It's both.
Some, yeah.
It's both. Some are coming back and joining the police force, and some are coming back, and the ones that aren't joining the system are considered by the Patriot Act to be terrorists.
They have grievances against us. Your grievances are noted.
Yeah, well...
yeah, you're supposed to come back with grievances if you have a conscience and you serve in the military. You see what's really going on.
According to our Constitution and Bill of Rights, the people have a right to redress grievances. But our government has come to the point where if you have a grievance, you've now been labeled a terrorist. That's a fact.
Well, in Russia, they've been not that generous with protests and dissent, but the news today was that Putin is scoring points, saying he'll allow protests at the Olympics. It's sort of cute. So we can have a competition among countries who can be more generous to protesters. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's not going to happen here. You know, they've been traditionally against protests going... You go back, oh man, go way back, when after World War II, when the veterans wanted their money and went to Washington, and they camped out in Washington.
After World War I or World War II? At Smedley Butler?
Yeah, World War I, I'm sorry. After World War I, the veterans wanted their money, and what did the government do? It sent out the military after the veterans and chased them out of the park and burnt down their shanties that they had built and they were staying in. And, you know.
I think that's so shameful when the veterans are treated that way, because after all, those are the ones that are strong-arming the rest of the world to have this type of military dominance. First the military comes in. I mean, first the IMF comes in, the International Monetary Fund, and they say you have to make cannabis illegal. Did you know that? To get a loan from the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund,
wow, no,
your country can't do it if cannabis is legal.
Oh dear.
So that's one of the first things to
now,
play
what would
the
have any
game.
Now, just think about it. Is there any rationale for that proposition?
Yeah, but from their side, when if you go back to the revolution again in this country, when we were fighting King George, one of the mainstays and one of the main things that made America economically viable was the hemp. They were growing it, and they were making clothes from it, and it made ropes, and it made sails, and it was real. It supported the economics here,
right?
And it made it so we could cotton and tobacco could be exported.
You know, I just thought of an analogy that hemp was like the gold holding up the dollar. Our dollar was being held up by hemp at that point.
Right, right. And it made it possible so we could export cotton, we could export tobacco, we could export tea that we were growing here, and that brought money in. Now, for the local people, what they made all their clothes out of, it was called homespun by the early people in this country. And it was that they made all their clothes from hemp. Hemp was what we kept here, and we survived on, and it made it so we could export cotton, tobacco, and other things. And George Washington said, "Grow hemp everywhere." Thomas Jefferson grew hemp, had a hemp plantation. You could pay your taxes in hemp in this country.
Wow.
Hemp, by the way, is marijuana for you people out there in the audience that don't know. There's commercial grade of marijuana is hemp basically, but all marijuana or hemp is hemp.
You know, even commercial grade, you could take those flowers and dry them up and smoke and get high.
Yeah, but they really didn't do that much. But even the sailors back then, they used to smoke rope.
But while we're on
true.
this, I do want to say, but I will say that hemp as a fiber is extra long,
right,
and therefore extra good. It's better than cotton for a lot of things. I've had a T-shirt made out of hemp that lasted so long, I was amazed. And even as it got finer and finer, it wouldn't give in, it wouldn't tear.
I know, it comes nicer and nicer.
Yeah, and they just sort of like for political reasons pushed out the production of hemp where we should be big into.
Well, it was for economics. It's the money people that kind of control the world saw that the industry in this country, especially what was I think in the 40s when
Dacron, nylon, all of the
all the synthetics were coming in, and it was competition for them, you know. It was stronger and better.
So that just the corruption of the government that they made laws against it to promote the interests of DuPont nylon and Orlon.
Right. And it really was, they used people smoking it as an excuse.
So that was the big part of the plot.
Right. The real plot was to kill the farmers economically.
Oh, and the other kicker was the paper industry with the Hearst.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So Hearst had a big investment in producing newsprint with lumber.
Right.
And so let's cut down trees instead of a perennial.
Right. And hemp was renewable, and it would have put the money in the hands of the farmers in this country.
Yeah.
And so look what's happened. We've destroyed our farms in this country. You know, there's no more family farms in this country. It's all big business. It's Monsanto moving in on everybody with genetically engineered stuff. You know, if they would legalize hemp and let farmers grow it, it wouldn't be long before the independent people, small-time people, would be getting become financially stable, you know. So that's one of the main reasons why they don't want to legalize. Well, I'm against legalize. I'm for repeal of a law that should have never been, because the law was unconstitutional from its inception, and the law was set up to hurt the American people, not to protect the American people. That's all bullshit that they told, oh, we're protecting your children from the scourges of marijuana. You know, that was just all a smokescreen so that they could destroy the economics of this country.
Which brings me to another topic. We were talking about those states now where it is illegal. It's getting a lot of news, Colorado. And we were saying that we are not comfortable with the state intruding on the whole process with taxation, that they have sort of been on the wrong track for so many years. Although this isn't the basis. I mean, the basis of the legalization in Colorado is not a declaration that the law has been unconstitutional all along. It would be nice to have a ruling like that.
Right.
I think as a minimum, they should allow people to grow their own at home. We agree on that. It's like, is that asking too much? A couple of seeds in your window?
As long as you're asking, it's asking too much. You have to stop asking these guys.
Yeah, but even if they say, okay, we're going to allow you to grow at home, look what happened to Lindy Heiss out in, what was it, Oregon?
Oregon, yeah.
Oregon, you know. She went and got a medical license to grow medical marijuana, right? And she was growing, and her boyfriend was on probation for I don't know what.
For very shaky reasons, too.
Right. And the police came to her house for the boyfriend, and when they came to the house, she had a license to grow medical marijuana. And they went in and they saw her marijuana, and she had been harvesting. I think it was she was allowed 6 plants, right? And she had just been in the process of harvesting her 6 to harvest, and she had 6 to grow to start again. But she hadn't finished harvesting the last part of the last plant when they came in.
Ooh,
so she had
that's heinous.
She had her 6 plants plus this part of another plant that she had been harvesting. So they charged her with what, 9 felonies?
Oh, I think it was up to even 11.
No,
11.
two misdemeanors. Nine felonies and two misdemeanors.
It was outrageous.
And she had a license.
And there was a scraggly plant.
Right.
Right.
This is the plant, Your Honor. You know, there is a legal principle, you probably heard, that the law doesn't bother with trifles.
Yeah.
But they did in this case.
Yeah, when you're going against the government, they don't bother with trifles. But when it's against you, trifles are very important. You know, that's the way our court system works. You know, because our court system, they profit every time they put someone in jail. So, you know, there's no, when you go before a judge, if that judge is going to put money in his retirement fund for every conviction that he gets.
Wow, they have something like that going?
Yeah, you didn't know that?
Oh, come on, tell me that again. Really?
You didn't know that?
Court registry.
Wait, you get a bonus for every conviction?
Yes.
Oh my God.
But it goes in their retirement fund.
That's still a bonus.
Yeah. So what they do is,
whoa, this is...
every conviction that they get, money goes into their retirement fund. So it's not in the judge's best interest to find somebody not guilty. That's why you see judges so much from the bench. The prosecutor, like on one of my cases, the prosecutor wasn't saying anything, and the judge was arguing the prosecutor's case from the bench. And I said to the judge, "You're acting as the prosecutor from the bench." And then I started saying something negative about the prosecutor, you know, and the prosecutor turns around and goes, "I didn't say anything." And I said, "That's right, Your Honor. He hasn't said anything. You're prosecuting from the bench," you know. And the judge just kept going along with it, you know. So
you see what the prosecutor was saying, you know, don't pick on me. What you have against me? I haven't said anything to you. And that's what Joe was saying. Precisely my point.
Yeah.
They know so little law that they just go chugging merrily along.
Right. The prosecutors these days know that the judge is going to support anything they're saying, even if they're throwing out complete bullshit. You know, you can be in there because I've studied a lot of law, and when I go into court, I know what I'm saying. You know, and I'm citing law, I'm citing Supreme Court, I'm citing the Constitution. And the prosecutor can go in and go, and the judge will go, "I like what the prosecutor just said." You know, I mean, that's how absurd our court system is. You know,
he speaks my language.
Right.
They have a language.
Yeah.
Only they understand.
I still haven't gotten over this deal where there's actually a law that they get money in their retirement for every conviction.
Look up
that's like raw corruption.
Registry Investment System. If you go look it up on the internet, Court Registry Investment System.
There's a lady named Lynne Stewart. She did a lot of research on this.
Okay, yeah, Lynne Schmaltz did a lot of research on it, but there's a lot of people that have done that. There's a lot of information on it. You know, all these courts have Dun and Bradstreet numbers.
No, wait. The deposit of the money in their retirement, is that by a government agency or by some other source? This is by.
Well, first you need a number. First you have to be turned into a corporation with all capital
Right.
letters, and then behind that is numbers. So pretty soon the court clerks are just manipulating numbers. But apparently when you go into the, I think Karen Hudes calls them the county executives. We've
Yeah.
known them as the county supervisors.
Yeah.
Yeah, some places it's county
But you go in
supervisors,
there and
sometimes it's executors.
You ask for risk management forms. In other words, this is the price of doing business. Every once in a while they get caught and people figure out what's happening, and then you have to settle it. The problem is, now that Joe and I have discovered so much about fraud, we realize that you don't really want, we want to move forward with this country and have Americans invest in America, invest in themselves, not count on the settlement of a big lawsuit so you're going to make millions of dollars, because the amounts of money right now isn't really money, it's credit. That's why Lynne Schmaltz's research showed that $10,000 a day of credit was flowing into accounts that were set up in the 30s when the gold was embezzled. So when you started off the show talking about the prison system and what Lynne has been through, I think by Lynne being a teacher at first and really working with the disadvantaged, she was in a position as a human being to, with a bar certification, to help people. But the certifying agency itself puts so many restrictions on to obstruct the natural course of justice. That's the difficult part. So Lynne worked within that system of privilege as an attorney who represents somebody who's viewed by the court as incompetent, incapable of speaking, who doesn't know the language, can't articulate even how to defend themselves.
Right, and they trick people in the court. The minute you take a lawyer, you've already given up a whole bunch of rights. They have it set up where, in our country, if you can speak for yourself, you're a sovereign. A sovereign speaks for themselves. When you go into court, if you speak for yourself, you can argue the Constitution, you can argue the Bill of Rights, you can argue Supreme Court rulings. When you take a lawyer, you're considered an incompetent because you need someone to speak for you. And just by being an incompetent, you now become a ward of the court. So you're no longer a sovereign citizen or a person who has rights. You're now considered like if you were in a mental institution and you were charged with a crime. If they bring you into court, well, you're mental, therefore you can't speak, so they have a lawyer to speak for you. And all these lawyers, it's all set up that all they ever want to do is plea bargain you. They're not going to try to get you off, or they're not going to try. First of all, lawyers never try to overthrow a law. Like the marijuana law should have been overthrown by lawyers way back when it first was in its inception. But what they do is they say, well, you know, if I go into court and I show that this is unconstitutional, and they throw that law out, then all those clients that would be coming to me who get busted for marijuana, I'm going to lose business. So no lawyer out there has ever challenged the constitutionality of the marijuana law right from its inception. And it was based on lies, based on fraud, you know, and even in when alcohol prohibition was finally hit the Supreme Court ruled you can't prohibit from the American people. Abraham Lincoln said you can't prohibit. So many of our past presidents said you can't, the government doesn't have a right to prohibit from the American people. Yet this marijuana law has been on the books for how many years now? Going from the 40s till now, and how many lives has it destroyed? But it's made a whole lot of lawyers rich, you know, and it's made a whole lot of judges rich, and they get $10,000 a day for every prisoner that they put in jail.
Well, I do want to apologize to you and the American people for being that lawyer who had the argument you're talking about, and I didn't push on it harder. As a lawyer, I had an opportunity to be a lawyer, and I got through the bar exam, and
said, this is unconscionable, I can't do it.
But I do want to, at this point, take this opportunity to make us all lawyers to this extent, that there is the winning argument that I could have made, that anyone now could make. I mean, I'll be like a quickie. Here's how you make the constitutional argument. The judge says, or no, the clerk, I guess, says, you have been charged with, is it the judge or the clerk? It says, you have been charged with violating the law against possession of marijuana. How do you plead?
It's actually possession with the intent to distribute, because possession was repealed in 1986.
Yeah, but none of them go by that, Paula.
I know they don't go by it, but if you actually look at the charges, it's possession with the intent to distribute and all that.
No,
they don't even go that far anymore.
I know, but I read it. It doesn't say possession.
Well, the one that I went up against was just simple possession, they call it. And
it was before 86, right?
In the state of New York, public possession is against the law, and private possession above a certain amount is the law. Private possession below a certain amount is legal. So I agree with there. But anyhow, when the judge says, how do you plead? You say that instead of pleading guilty or innocent, in this situation, I challenge the law as unconstitutional. I ask for a hearing on the basis that fundamental constitutionally protected rights are at stake, and we used to talk plenty, all of us, about what rights are at stake. But at this point, I would say that liberty involves not only the right to act in certain situations if it doesn't hurt anybody, but in addition, and more basically, liberty involves the freedom to think. And marijuana is about the freedom to think.
Of course.
And to identify and pin the tail on that exactly, that's the issue, freedom of thought.
Wasn't that Larry's big thing, the thought police?
No, I don't think so.
No?
I don't remember that.
But anyhow, the way the game goes is when you can show the court fundamental constitutionally protected individual rights, and you can say in the Bill of Rights is implied freedom of thought. It is not actually spelled out. They don't say that. But when they give you the freedom to speak, then you'd think and thought and
you could organize your thoughts.
And also freedom to write, freedom of the press. There could be some thinking involved in that process. So it's one of the implied rights. And if the judge says, wait, no, yeah, it does say freedom of speech, it does say freedom of the press, but it doesn't say to think, then you can say, no, the joke's on you, Judge. Number 9 says that just because it isn't explicitly spelled out in one of the numbered list of goodies, it's still not to be denied or disparaged, and so the implied rights are in there solid, baby. And therefore, oh, wait, you don't win yet. But then the judge says, oh, okay, you win the first half. You have demonstrated fundamental constitutionally protected rights are at stake. Now, what happens is, in that case, the judge then shifts the burden to the other side, the government, the state. And they ask the government, the prosecutor, the DA, the attorney general, hey, fellas, can you come up with a justification, a compelling reason, so that even though we don't want to, trounce on these rights, that there's some pull in the other direction, that there's some horrible danger, that there's some pathological tragedy to prevent. What do you guys got?
Reason.
A reason that the court feels compelled to allow you to trounce on the freedom of thought.
And they'll always say, we're protecting the children. That's how that's the scam all the time.
Well, no, that's one of them.
Protecting the children.
What they were saying originally was that it is a gateway to the whole world of drugs. And sure enough, if you make it illegal so that the same crook who's selling you that has a whole case of other, would you like some heroin, some cocaine, that it does
some
make it worse.
Some Oxycontin, some Prozac, everything's winding up on the streets.
Oh, on the streets, right. So the point is, again, is to go like Jefferson and say it's good stuff and that helps you think better. And so, Judge, what do you got on the compelling state interest? The point is this, that in the old days, if you can't show the court fundamental rights, laws are still okay on the books if they're only based on politics. But once you can show the court that there are fundamental constitutionally protected rights, then they got to do better than politics for the reason of the law. They got to have some science. And more it's becoming obvious that the campaign against marijuana was built on a house of cards, that the government had such a grudge against marijuana they wouldn't fund all the studies they could have funded to show all the good things that marijuana can do. But I did hear in the last year there were more than 1,500 studies. So the tide is breaking there that we're going to finally learn the wonderful things medicinally that marijuana does.
Yeah, but even a lot of the studies are slanted. Like, for example, when they did the study on supposedly brain cancer, they were checking to see our government funded what were the two groups?
American Cancer Society,
American
University of Virginia.
Right, the American Cancer Society and somebody else.
The University of Virginia, she said.
Right. Well, they funded the University of Virginia.
You talking the 1970 study?
Oh, right.
Yeah.
The DEA.
Right, the DEA was the other one.
Oh.
They funded the university study.
It was a small study.
Right.
And when they found that it actually shrunk tumors.
Right, what they did was, instead of telling the American people the truth that pure THC attacks brain cancer cells and it doesn't do any harm to the normal cells. When they put it out to the people, this was in the 70s, they turned around and said, we have proof that it attacks brain cells.
Really?
Not cancerous
But they
brain
didn't
cells.
say it attacked the cancer cells in the brain.
Wow.
So they for many years people were like, oh yeah, the government did the research and it attacks brain cells.
Only the bad ones, the cancer ones.
Right,
oh.
but they
That was
didn't
in
tell them that it
74.
only attacks the cancer cells. It doesn't do any harm to the normal cells. So, that's the kind of research that we get from government. Anytime they do research, they spin it.
Well, I did
So
hear
it hit
that
the media for a while, and then for that while that it hit, it went out on radio, and Rick Simpson heard THC's curing cancer, and then he sort of forgot about it and figured if it really was working, he would have heard more from it. But what they did was they twisted it, like Joe said, to say it kills brain cells, not the cancerous brain cells, then squished it, stopped the story, and it wasn't until Manuel Guzman, that was in 74.
And they actually hid the research, just to add to what you're saying.
Well, they hid it, but Manuel Guzman managed to read it. It hit one publication, I don't know if it was Nature or Science magazine, and Guzman was a researcher in Spain. He read the article, and just from reading the article, he recreated the study and got the same results. And then in 2003 or 4 or something, whenever Guzman published it, the media acted as if this was news. But this is 2002 or 3 or 4, whereas it was in 1974. So after 25 years, it's like the media machine rolls along and people forget about it. And now it comes up again. But it's the same research. And they're all really squirrely. The doctors, the scientists, at first they heard, a TV producer in Manhattan, and then they find out it's public access. At first they're really thrilled. They think if you can get the attention of the public, then maybe their research can move forward. And it's not just cannabis. Anything that is directly addressing pharmaceutical profits, like vitamin D studies. Amazing studies for 30 years have been coming out of the University of California at San Diego. They're little funded, but these guys are so grandfathered in and the research is so good that and the guys have tenure, they can't get rid of the scientists. But they keep squelching the research. Breast cancer could be virtually eliminated just by sunbathing if people understood that. But we live like we're vitamin D factories that are 90% covered up.
No,
That's the
instead
price of civilization.
So vitamin D could do it instead of sunbathing too?
Well, when I
Well,
started
sunbathing's how you get vitamin D.
No, I'd take
vitamin D is
5,000 units a day with a
right.
nice little shiny
5,000
pill.
is not much, especially for older folks.
5 ain't enough?
No, it's not enough. You know, but the idea is that, you know, what else is in sunlight besides vitamin D that's interacting with our skin, and it's producing more of a hormone than a vitamin. If you took a plant and you put a bandage on it, you know, you would expect that part with the bandage to have that sort of sickly green look as opposed to a nice green. If you stop light from a plant, you hurt the plant. If you stop light from us, you know, we're also harmed.
You know, that reminds me, I did want to make one point on a previous discussion, and that is that prisoners should be allowed sunlight.
Yes. I even thought that some of the violent suppression of this research would make it seem to keep people in prisons where they're not seeing sunlight to be cruel and unusual punishment. And also when you hear about, oh, you know, the modern science and antibiotics, you know, they were coming in around the 30s. But really it was sanitation. When you have people working in, particularly little children, working in these slave-like conditions where there's no sunlight coming in, these are the kids that were getting rickets. Again, you're talking about the children.
Right.
In mother's milk there's cannabinoid-like compounds, you know, so THC is a good thing to have in the body. And yet things like rickets, which comes through lack of vitamin D, our society is notorious for abusing children, you know, slave labor. So I was thinking about that. If the vitamin D studies got released, you would have to rethink how prisons are built. Maybe just get rid of them. Just let everybody run free.
I do.
No, I think that there is, if you've got really violent, dangerous people, you know, child molesters who continue. I'm not talking about just somebody who looked at some child porn. You know what I mean? I'm talking about people who act on it. You know, or murderers. You know, you got someone who's murdered and then he gets off and then he goes and murders again. There is a place for prison, but not the prison systems we have. I mean, we have so many people incarcerated in this country. It's absurd. You know, the people that really should be in prison are the bankers and the politicians. You know, who's hurt more
knowingly,
this country?
intentionally, and willingly.
Who's hurt more this country? The drug dealers who are selling a product that people beat their door down to get, or the bankers who put 14.5 million families out on the street? You know, and the bankers created the problem. They set it up so that people would take the loans. They set it up so the economy would collapse and people couldn't pay the loans, so that they could seize the houses, so that they could get the government to bail them out. Now, the bankers have done more harm to this country than all the drug dealers in this country, even the worst of them. Yet the bankers get bailed out.
And the bankers oftentimes invest in big international drug deals.
Right.
And
right.
they never go to prison.
Right.
Well, they invest in the prisons.
And they invest in the prisons.
So they're making money all ways.
Right. And the politicians that have sold out the people of this country, and not the politicians. When we elect politicians, we elect them to work for us. Anytime that the politicians work against the people, they're committing treason. So, you know, both the Bushes, Bill Clinton, Obama, they've all signed legislation that directly violates the Constitution. All of them have committed treason. Yet, people, oh, Mr. President, you know, they keep him on a pedestal. Oh, the Senate, the Congress, they're like lords. Like, you know, this country was never supposed to have lords or royalty. But our Senate and our Congress, They all got limousines. They all got expense accounts. You know, when they go someplace, they go right to the head of the line. They don't have to wait in line like everybody else. You know, we have this privileged class in America, and the rest of us just get screwed. And that was, the Founding Fathers were totally against that. And until the American people wake up and demand change and hold our politicians responsible, say, you work for us. What are you doing?
You know, I want to go to that point you were saying the people demand change, and that the change that I'm inviting us to consider is to reconsider, as you were saying, the whole prison idea of punishment.
Right.
That you're saying for the purposes of custody, that's one thing. But to suffer slavery in modern times is an uncivilized thing. And the logic of the punishment is you broke the law. In the old days, when they were pretty heavy-duty into religion and fundamentalism and all that, breaking the law was to violate the words of God and his rules and all that. But at this point, we know that the laws that we're breaking are cooked up by the crooks in Washington.
Right.
There's nothing holy about the law, that it's not such a big deal to even break the law, and in particular the unconstitutional laws.
Yeah.
But even generally speaking, like this kid who got 15 years for, oh, and incidentally, it wasn't baseball caps, it was socks. It was socks and parkas. That he allowed some guy to have a sack of those. He was going to bring them to the Arabs or something, who were probably fighting one of our propped up governments, and that makes them terrorists. So we need a revolutionary alternative, and as far as, can you imagine, like in the revolution to come, what we would replace prisons is like we wouldn't have much robbery if we had society the way it ought to be. I mean, if people weren't so poor.
If you weren't stealing from the people, you wouldn't have so much robbery.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if we didn't have billionaires and trillionaires, there'd be enough money for everybody.
There you
know?
go. That's the problem.
That's one of the problems. I've said many, many times, one of the problems with capitalism is they say, if you're in this economic thing, you're poor. If you're in this economic thing, you're middle class. If you're in this economic thing, you're upper middle class. And then but they didn't say there's a limit on wealth. What they should have said was, after you make, say, $5 or even $10 million, $10 million is not that much money. At $10 million, you get your gold watch, you get your pat on the back, and you retire.
Enough already.
And you can't make any more. If you make any more, it has to go to charity, you know.
But what about like the Native American model? You know, as elders became more and more elder, they were more and more respected for their consciousness. So you never think of the Native American Indians as becoming billionaires or gazillionaires.
Just more appreciated.
And yet,
Yeah.
I heard it was quite an advanced civilization, that we don't really even understand what Columbus really discovered here.
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of the stuff, especially the stuff where how they picked their leaders, you know, that it was always the elder women, the grandmothers, who picked the chiefs, because they saw the kid when he grew up, and they knew what kid would make a good leader, what kid was the bully. The bully, you make the war chief, you know.
Right.
And so, you know, on that end, their way of picking leaders was very good.
We got a position for you, something for everyone.
Right. And you know, the kid that watched out for the other kids, that took care of the other kids, he was the chief who they put in charge of moving the tribe to the best place where the hunting grounds were good, and where, you know, because they knew he would look out for the people, you know. On that, we could learn a lot from the Indians, but unfortunately, the way society is and the way everything's gone, we're never going to go back to what the Indians had. But we can learn a lot from how they picked their leaders. you know.
I just meant that as the elders became more and more elder, using your model to say after making $10 million you retire, somebody who's creative, they're not just going to stop being creative.
Well, when I say retire, I mean
so,
retire from making money. Now, if someone made $10 million and they want to still teach someone else how to make their $10 million,
right.
You know, I mean, I'm not saying that they should be put on the shelf.
Right.
But they should be told, you can't make any more. You've made enough for you to live on happily and for your children to live comfortably. You've got to leave some for everybody else.
Right. In our last 3 minutes before Ralph comes, what would you both like to learn from Ralph?
Well, I wanted to make a point with Ralph that an additional argument in favor of her not having been sentenced and all that is double jeopardy. That the crime that she was ultimately given 10 years for had already been adjudged and a penalty had already been made by the prison authorities, so she was suspended. And
no, by the judge, not the prison authorities.
No, that's the point. She was suspended by the prison authorities for violating the security measures, and it was like a 3-month suspension, and then it was over, and she could come back. So she had paid a penalty for the infraction that they then decided was also material support.
Oh, and then on top of it, the judge sentenced her, what, to 2.5 years?
Right, 28 months.
28 months, and then
reneged.
And
the politicians say, we don't like that you gave her that, and then the judge...
Well, you're calling it politicians, but what it was an appeal by the state to the higher level, which is the U.S. District, what is it, the Circuit Court, the Second Circuit for Southern District, New York, the Second Circuit, and they had a whole bunch of judges, and they said that it wasn't enough, that they wanted blood, that she was not recalcitrant, that she said she could do it standing on her head.
Yeah, and you were the one that got that quote. Can you explain that in our last minute?
She said that because she was talking to supporters who were so disappointed after all their protesting and demonstrating that she wasn't off. They were hoping she would get 0, and the fact that she got some sentence at all, even though it was relatively less than the government had asked for, she was trying to give them not to feel so bad, so she said it doesn't hurt so much, kind of thing.
But my point is, once they give a sentence, they should never be able to increase that sentence.
So there you have it. This is Paula Gloria, and this has been an episode Farther Down the Rabbit Hole. We're awaiting Ralph Pointer, who's going to give us the latest about Lynne Stewart. Please stay tuned for more shows, and call MNN and ask if Farther Down the Rabbit Hole can go live, because we would like to hear from you directly in real time. Thank you very much for joining us.